All right, I've started my stream on YouTube and now I'm connecting on IGTV. And welcome to this week's studio stream live from Durham, North Carolina. Let's see, did I connect on IGTV? Yes, I did. So I have a new camera set up today for YouTube, right concurrent with my camera for IGTV. So let's see how this goes. The perspective, again, on YouTube, it's landscape, but now the viewpoint is a little lower and you're right here, right up next to my workspace. So we'll see how this video goes when the stream is over. And the stream today, oh, hi, welcome. I see I have Maddie Blatt, who is one of our incoming graduate students for fall. Good to see you, Maddie. And also Arlene has joined on IGTV, and I expect she's also maybe on YouTube just because the chat is a little bit easier to run there and the landscape view is a little bit broader than this window on IGTV. But so for today's studio stream, if you were here last week, you might recall that I was working on, this is a pattern for an oak leaf that I then cut out in a couple of them in this variegated dyed wool felt. And that was kind of the whole of the stream last time, because I often underestimate how much time it's going to take me to do something. But this week, my goal is to finish the felt ornament that I meant to do last week in addition to oak leaves, which is a 3-part bird wing, of which I have one part here and then sort of a diagram that you can see what the other 2 parts are that then layer over top of this. But before we start that, I want to talk really quickly about shoes and mass-produced shoes, but a little information about how mass-produced shoes are made that can help you in terms of purchasing shoes for yourself in your own life. And this is something that, as a theatrical craftsperson and a costumer, especially in dancing shows, we often speak with the performers about the brands and styles of shoes that they know fit them well, because that gives us a clue to what types of other shoes we might be able to choose from. Oh, who is this? Juliet. Hey, welcome. More people joining on both platforms, YouTube and IGTV. And so I guess let's just start with this shoe right here, which some of this is just me gloating about how amazing this shoe is that I just bought this week. Well, it just arrived in the mail. I think I actually bought it last week. But this shoe is a brand and a style that I own, I think, 3 pairs of this shoe, because when I bought the first pair, I could tell immediately that it fit me perfectly, that it was like the dream shoe, you know. And if particularly if you have any challenges to the shape of your feet, like I see lots of likes and loves coming in on this, because yeah, it's an amazing shoe. If you have an unusual shape to your foot, like if it's very narrow, or if you have fallen arches or extremely high arches, anything that makes your foot non-standard, then it can be very hard to find shoes that fit you well. And when you do, it's like the holy grail. It's like, oh my gosh, I must own more shoes just like this, except you don't really want to own 20 pairs of the exact same style of shoe. I mean, that's not entirely true. I had a boyfriend that had 6 pairs of the same exact style of Converse in various stages of disrepair. And my father owns 5 pairs of John Fluvog wingtips in various stages of disrepair. So, that is certainly one strategy, but that is not the strategy that I have approached with respect to this shoe here, which, like I said, this shoe fits me perfectly. It won't necessarily fit you perfectly. But the brand name on this, if you can see inside here, is Chelsea Crew. And that's sort of a mid-range, ready-to-wear brand. These brand new cost me $70. But the first pair that I bought of these, when I discovered this is my shoe style, I was working in the garment district in New York City at a shop called Parsons Mears, which they're no longer based in the garment district, but they were at the time. And I believe it was 39th, maybe between 6th and 7th. I love how everything is on a grid in New York City, and you can say something like that and someone who's been there before knows exactly where you're talking about. But so the garment district at the time, so there would be manufacturing houses like Parsons Mears, but also other sewing manufacturing studios and factories. And on the first floor, there's a lot of retail that either caters to makers of garments, like notions and ribbons and fabric yardage and so forth, or they sell wholesale lots of already produced garments. And so you would have buyers from specialty boutiques all over the country making buying trips to New York City. They come to the garment district, they place orders for the styles that their boutiques are going to carry for the next season, and then they go home. And this is like it's a working vacation, I guess, which I was there on a working vacation too, I guess, since I was only working at Parsons for the summer. And the place that sold the very first pair of these Chelsea Crew shoes that I bought, which I actually have an example of it here, which if you look at this shoe, it's a T-strap. This one has lacing in the front of it, but they're basically, let me put them together, they're basically the same silhouette. Like, they're not the same style and they're not the same media, but they're the same silhouette. And that is what I noted about this original pair of Chelsea Crew, that I was like, this is perfect. I need more shoes like this, but I don't want 200 pairs of yellow T-straps. I only want one, but I want more shoes that fit like this. And I put a search onto eBay of this brand name, and it doesn't come up too terribly often, but when it does, like for example, this red shoe here, put it back to back with this one, and this one they're a little closer. They're basically the same style and the same pattern, but the material, this is a red leather look, and this is patent leather on the heel and the toe cap and the heel cap, but then we have this dotted material and the white piping. The style lines are the same. So what this tells me, or what this told me, when I first found this shoe and decided I wanted more and searched on it, continue to search on it for eBay, which is how I found these, is that once you find one pair that the silhouette fits your foot well, which, thank you, Trisha, in IGTV, she's complimented how awesome these shoes are, and they are all, in my opinion, quite awesome. But I buy them without ever trying them on, because I already know from buying that original yellow pair in the garment district, 2015, so that's been 6 years ago at this point. I know that shoes that are built on this last will fit me perfectly. And if you don't know what a last is, I'm about to show you. I think many of my followers are familiar with millinery and blocking and hat blocks, and how, to block, for example, a round crown hat, you need a wooden hat block in the shape that you're going to pull the felt over. And a last is kind of the same thing. So this is not the last for these shoes by any stretch, because this is the last for a shoe that has an extremely pointy tip to the toe. Like this is a last for some serious winkle picker witch shoes, right? But it's a wooden shape, a form of the interior of the finished shoe. So I knew that the version of this that was produced by Chelsea Crew to make these shoes would be the same across all styles that are this basic silhouette. So that's how I buy shoes sight unseen for myself, and I'm not worried about whether they're going to fit me or not, because I know that if the last is one that, if shoes built on this last, not this last, but I'm speaking of the last that was used for those shoes. If those shoes are built on that last, I know how they will fit me already. I don't need to try them on because they're all made on the same form. It's kind of like, well, I guess that's not a good analogy. People don't go out and buy tons and tons of felt hats anymore. So I can equate it to hat blocks, and many of you who are milliners will understand the concept between blocking a hat and building a shoe on a last, in that you need a positive mold on which to form your material. But many of you aren't like, oh, well, if I buy only hats that have been blocked on this hat block. Well, I guess some of us who are milliners might perhaps feel that way. My cat Riley has just entered the room, so I just want to note that there may be some kitty bombing happening in this stream. And I also want to note, before I move on from my glorious shoe coup here that I acquired this week, that this week's stream needs to end at 3:45. I have a 4 o'clock appointment that has appeared, but it's one that I think I can join via Zoom on my phone, so I don't really need to completely rework my setup post-stream before that meeting happens, but I still want a 15-minute window to just change gears. So 3:45, I've set my alarm, that'll happen. But let's move on from shoe gloating. I'm so excited about those shoes. It doesn't really matter because I haven't worn hard shoes other than to go to the dentist, and also when Chris dropped a knife on his foot and I had to take him to surgery. But suffice it to say, I've probably worn hard shoes like 5 times in the whole pandemic, because I've been working from home and constructing costume pieces from home, from this home studio, and it just has not, I don't walk around my house in super cute pumps with lace up Oxford front black and white polka dot. I mean, I should maybe just wear those around the house just because they're, glorious. But anyway, so I'm moving on to the point where I'm cutting out my other 2 patterns of the parts that comprise my felt wing that I'll be making as a millinery adornment, a millinery ornament, for an as yet indeterminate hat. So as with the oak leaves that I created last week, it was more of an exercise to just experiment with the process and see if I produced something that I thought was attractive. And what is most likely to happen at the end of all of this is I'll create these collections of felt millinery trim, and when we return in person to the theater where I work, PlayMakers Repertory, they're in Chapel Hill, North Carolina. My studio here is in Durham, which these are all towns that are, it's like the difference between Queens and Manhattan in New York. Like, we're all part of the Triangle, which is really the same giant urban area. But anyway, I will probably take these things once we return to work on site in the theater, and just place them into the corresponding millinery trim storage, at the studio on site at the theater. We have boxes and boxes of millinery trim storage that are classified by item and then by color. So it'll be like warm colored flowers, red, orange, pink, yellow, cool colored greenery and flowers, feathers, things of that sort. So these will probably go into that, so that when we're working on a show and a costume designer has chosen a hat from stock, perhaps, or maybe I'm making one from scratch, but we don't know how we're going to trim it out yet. They like to just sort of like dig through those boxes and choose what I call trim stories, which people who have attended this studio stream in the past will probably have heard me talk about trim stories, because it's frequently something I'm talking about when I'm working on a hat, which is most of what I've been doing since I taught millinery last semester. But anyway, so these things will probably just go into that stock and become part of future trim stories for future costume designers to choose from in the making of hats for future shows, which I can't confirm anything about next season, but I have heard that it is very likely that Playmakers will announce a season worth of shows. Hopefully, I think they're not planning on actually announcing it until until July, just because we don't know what's going to happen with the virus and the vaccine rollout and how that's going to impact fall semester and so forth. But if all goes as planned, which nothing has gone as planned since, 2019, basically. But if all goes as planned, and I'm being an optimist here, I'm hoping that it does go as planned. We have some really exciting shows that are being discussed, and if even 2 or 3 of them are chosen, then we'll be making some really cool stuff next year. So that is something to look forward to. Let us hope. Now I have cut out my 3 parts so I can sort of show you the idea behind what the finished... where'd it go? I have one more. Oh, there we go. I can show you the idea behind what the finished wing will look like. And if you look at this here, each one of these layers will be this sort of variegated heathered blue slate wool. My idea is that these are reminiscent of blue jay wings, perhaps, or bluebirds. Birds are blue. Macaw, they are also blue. Some of them are. So there'll be 3 different layers of it. And if you saw the studio stream on making felt feathers, which if you didn't, you don't even need to find it in my stream background. I actually did a condensed, streamlined video on making felt feathers from millinery felt, wool, and fur felt for my YouTube channel. So you can go watch that. I think it's like a 2 or 3 minute video. And those feathers are much more realistic looking. I mean, they're not going to be mistaken for actual bird feathers by any stretch of the imagination, but they're a lot more representative than this, which this wing will be very stylized. But it may also be exactly what somebody wants with the given aesthetic of a show. So, I'm just experimenting with all of these different cut felt ornaments. Oh, I see Kim just joined. Hatnip Hats over on IGTV. Great to see you. Kim is a local milliner and a former student, but she is not a theatrical milliner. She is a fashion milliner, making couture bespoke hats for, streetwear purposes. And she lives here in Chapel Hill. And that's very exciting because I think we both become fully vaccinated within a few days of one another. And we do have a plan for a hat blocking social hour at some point. I think we said I believe it's the last weekend, one of the days of the last week in May, that I'm very much looking forward to. Because, with hat blocks in particular, like blocking of hats is, well, I love it. It's a great way to make hats. I teach it in my millinery class for the graduate program, but you are limited in the styles of hats that you can make by the blocks that you own. Kind of the same way that, like, to circle back around to the super fabulous shoes and the shoe last, that this shoe has a very rounded bump toe, and so the last that it comes from has to have that. So this last with this super sharp, knife point of a toe here, you would never get this shoe off of this last, and you would never use this last to try to make this shoe, right? And so because you are limited to only the blocks that you have, then it can be wonderful to sort of set up a sort of a block party, as Kim and I are hopefully going to be doing soon, where each person has their own collection of blocks, but you can use one another's blocks in that in the context of that event, and then you make really one-of-a-kind hats because you don't own that block anymore. You're just borrowing it from your colleague and your friend. Something that reminds me, something that I feel like we are too geographically far-flung here in particularly the American Southeast. There just are not enough milliners in any geographical area to support this. But I think you could, this idea that I'm about to elaborate on, I think you could make it work somewhere like New York or Chicago, and that is a block library. That is something that there's a millinery supply company in Australia that has a block library that I've always been envious of, in a sense, that that the millinery industry in Australia is robust enough to support that there's interest in that, that it makes any sense to even do it, whereby the company owns like all these different hat blocks, and you can check them out and then make a few hats on them, bring them back, and I think it's kind of, I believe that the structure is kind of like a gym membership. Like, you pay a certain amount to be a member of the block library, and then you can check out X number of blocks a season or whatever. I don't think that would fly. Certainly not here in the southeast of the U.S. But I think it might fly, particularly in Chicago and New York, because they have very robust millinery communities in both of those places. So there's a free business suggestion. If you want to move to Chicago or New York, and start a block library, I think it could be a success. So I have cut the first, this is like the base layer of my felt wing that I now have 2 more to create. And then we'll discuss how I think I might be going to put these together. Kim says in IGTV chat, Milliners Guild has a hat block library. It's still somewhat small, but it's growing. You do have to be a guild member to access it though, which that makes sense. And that is probably the best way to make that work in Chicago, because the Milliners Guild there is there's a lot of people who are members of it, and a lot of people who are members of it who aren't necessarily Chicago residents. And I could be wrong there. I'm sort of talking out of like impressions that I have from when I was paying attention to that sort of thing 2 or 3 years ago. But I'm trying to layer up my pieces of felt to minimize waste here. It's somewhat reminiscent of cutting patterns out of leather, where you don't necessarily need to pay attention to any kind of grain line per se. In some applications, I guess you do need to pay attention to where on the hide of the animal the leather came from, and usually the direction of nose to tail stretch, or lack of stretch. In a leather hide, you have more stretch around the girth of the animal than the length, which makes sense because animals grow to be a certain physical structure, a certain, I don't want to say height because they're not standing on their legs, but if they were 2-legged creatures, it would be a certain height. But then they can get more portly or skinny depending upon how much you feed them, of course. And so the stretch of a leather hide around the girth of the animal is, you can manipulate it significantly more than you can down the length of it, which is absolutely not totally useless to know in the context of, it is totally useless to know in the context of felt millinery trim, but leather is a material that is used in millinery, certainly. More often, I think, in leather flowers, though also sometimes as a cover material. You can block with it. But that's really relevant to continue to circle back to shoe lasts in the shape of footwear. It's really relevant in this sense because if you consider the toe of these shoes, where there's extreme curvature and there's no darts or seams in here, this little bump toe shoe here, that material has been formed into a complex curve around the last of this. And so if you were doing this, obviously this is not in leather, this is vinyl, but if you were doing this as a leather shoe, let me pull up one of these that, this one has a seam to get it to take that curve. So this must not have wanted to stretch nearly as much as the plastic did. Or perhaps they just oriented it incorrectly. No, we have that same seam here in this leather finish as well, but not remotely in this vinyl. So, and I wish, I have a graduate student right now, Lou Perez, who is a shoemaker, or she was when she came, she still makes shoes, but she's in graduate school, so she makes a whole lot of other stuff too. So she would actually have something really perhaps helpful to contribute to this conversation. But the amount of curvature that you put into a curved toe of a shoe, it's important to pay attention to the location of the leather on the hide to make sure you have enough curve to get it to stretch over what you need it to stretch over. I pay so much attention the location of seam lines on shoes now, ever since I began teaching in a costume production program, which I will add, we don't make shoes from scratch. I have this last here because I dropped off my course. Have like these Rubbermaid tubs full of teaching materials, and I dropped off my course materials for dye class, which is ending. Our last day of class at the university is this coming Wednesday, I believe. So of course I'm done with the teaching materials because like there's only like a week left, and this semester has been largely asynchronous online delivery, which means I program a website with the lectures and text and information about the assignments, and then they sign up for time in the shop and they do them. Do the projects, and then just contact me if they have any specific questions about the projects, which it worked, but it's not my favorite way to teach because it feels very distant. I'm not present to witness the projects coming together, which I think is actually maybe a little bit better for the students in that I'm not there to save them from choices that will not have desirable results, but you do often learn so much better if you screw something up, So I think that they have had the opportunity to experiment and witness the results of their experiments without me jumping in and saying like, oh, you don't want to do that, or I don't know about that. They get the chance to just sort of fail on their own terms if they're going to, and succeed on their own terms as well. But it's lonely, it's lonely to be like, to only see the finished projects when they present them and to not see any of the process of constructing them. I see Arlene says in the YouTube chat, a block library sounds like an excellent idea. I know of a local lace making group that has a lending library of lace books because most libraries don't have, most libraries have maybe 2 lace books. Well, that is true. And that is another example of an excellent community resource among a group of makers of a sort of a niche interest, Oh, and Arlene says maybe the screw up will have interesting unintended results. That's true. I worry sometimes that because I have had certain poor results, and often I will jump into, I pull myself back from jumping into people's projects unless they specifically ask me exactly what I'm thinking. I try so hard not to say like, well, you can use that material, but it'll never dry. But, I try not to say those things because it is true. Sometimes something that I think that's never going to work, it screws up, but it screws up in a really interesting way. And sometimes that's where innovation comes from, where you're like, oh, well, I never would have thought that would work, but not only does it work, but the results are unusually beautiful or whatever. I'm here cutting my final feathers of this last bit of my wing. And then I will admit that I don't actually know what the next step to this is. This is all sort of based upon some trims that I saw. I think it was a hat on Pinterest that had some beautiful, looked like hand cut felt trims, you know, where you use the same exact felt as the hat is made from. So basically it's probably the strip of felt that you cut away from the end of the hat body when you make it. And it's really a resourceful way to work with that material that you see happening a lot in hats of the 1940s, particularly then, because there were wartime austerity measures and you couldn't buy a lot of brand new stuff. Things are being commandeered for the war effort and so forth, and you're having, if you're a milliner at that time, you're having to work with a lot of unusual materials that maybe you haven't worked with before, or you're remaking things. Like you have a hat from, you know, you have your grandmother's hat, and that's definitely not in style anymore. So you're gonna take it apart and just use materials from it and so forth. And definitely these hats where maybe it's a brand new hat body, maybe it's a reworked hat, you know, like a wide awake hat style, where that's a felt hat that has a pretty wide brim. And you could make one of those smaller profile hats that were really big in women's fashion in the 1940s, and the offcut would be a thing that you could make a bunch of these wings out of. So here's my finished wing, which light wise I can't tell. I have poor lighting in here well, I just have the light sources over here. Anyway, there's my finished wing. And I think I said I didn't know what happened next, because the original that I looked at, there was one that appeared to just be glued together. Like the layers of the wing had no observable way that they were connected together, but they had to be connected together. So I'm assuming that it was some kind of water-based glue. You know, milliners use a lot of glue that you can't see. We don't like to use the glue in theatrical millinery much, because it's water-based glue. You can steam it or soak it and get it to let go and reposition something. But it often leaves a residue that you then have to figure out how to get off of there. And certainly if it's something like hot glue or one of the solvent-based glues like E6000 or Fabri-Tac, then you only want to use those if it's like, this has to be done really fast and I don't care that the hat makes the hat unalterable. So that's a large digression, in which I wind up saying that I think one of the original ones was all three layers glued together. I don't want to do that. Not just because I think like a theatrical milliner and you think in terms of you're building something, but you also need to reverse engineer it and think about how you can take it apart and rebuild it differently. And that's fine. Like that's how you need to think, or that's the way that it's most efficient to think. But I was thinking with this that instead of gluing the layers together, that it might be interesting to tack them. One idea is to tack them together with these long, almost like tailor tacks, with long tacks that sort of reinforce the shape of these feathers, you know, the demarcations between them. And so I could do a row of long tacks down the length of this piece here. And I don't know that it necessarily works so well up here at the top. But those would be something I'd be doing by hand, and perhaps I could, with stitching, echo the scallops of this top piece to sort of be those kind of, I think they're called, well, I'm going to get it wrong, the little feathers that exist at the base of the wing where it joins to, I guess birds don't have shoulders, but their shoulder joint. Um, I realize that I don't know the names of bird bones. Does a bird have a clavicle and a shoulder blade? I don't know. But anyway, they do have those little tiny feathers there where the base of the wing is. And it might be interesting to evoke those with stitching to attach this third piece here. Arlene suggests tiny metal brads, like eyes on the feathers, which would be very peacocky, yes. That's an idea. That's a good idea. That would be a way to bring a different quality of shiny metal against matte felt. Could be interesting. I also was thinking that I could stabilize this whole 3-part wing with some machine stitching. And if I machine stitched down halfway from this, I start up here and I go down and off the end of that piece and then circle back up to create like a row of stitching feathers that would exist in this mid space here. That could be quite interesting. And I like I said, I haven't decided on how I'm going to finish that yet. I only know that I'll figure it out by next week, because my goal is to have these felt trims completed with ornamental stitching and such for the next studio stream, to just show you and have some closure with these projects that have existed for this stream and last stream. Which brings me to the point, though, that I'm actually not entirely sure that I'll be able to stream next week, because our last day of class is Wednesday, and I believe that we have scheduled student evaluations for Thursday. And I can't remember if that extends into my stream time or not. So I'll have to double check that with my work calendar. And if I wind up not streaming, I might postpone the stream and maybe it goes from like 3:30 to 4 or something, just with a delayed start. But if I have to completely cancel it, I will hopefully have a bonus video that I can release instead. I like to stay on that schedule of an upload on Monday and a stream on Thursday, and if I can't stream on Thursday, then I have a second upload. Just because it doesn't make so much of a difference on IGTV, but on YouTube, it affects the algorithm and how YouTube as a platform sees my channel performing. So, anyway, I will try to have a stream next week, even if I have to delay it and start at 3:30, because, like I said, we're having student evaluations, which, if you care, which I think at least one person who checked into this stream, Maddie, who may or may not still be hanging out, but Maddie might want to know what the evaluations are like, because they're going to be an incoming student in the fall. Yay! That is one private meetings where each graduate student, right now we're doing them on Zoom. We used to do them in person as a kind of, I don't want to say tea party, but kind of. It's kind of like having coffee with your professors. Except that then we'd be drinking coffee all day long because we see each person individually. And we have a Zoom where we meet with them, and everybody that you've had a class with, which can be 2 people, minimum of 2 people, maximum of 4 people, I think. First year's first semester have maybe 4 different professors. By the time you get to be a third year, there's really only 2 people that you're having class with. Anyway, you get feedback and on, like, here's how you've done this semester. These things were extremely successful. This was something that you might want to work on in the future. And you have the opportunity to offer feedback like, I would really like to do menswear for a stage show next season. Or, there's my alarm, but I will finish my thought. Or you might say, I've draped for this one actor for 3 performances now, and I would really like to experience with more body types for Playmakers, because all the grad students do costumes for the stage shows as well as for their classes. Or you might say, I'm really nervous about this class that is in spring semester because I'm not very confident with using technology and its digital technologies for costume production. And then we can offer some pointers or some reassurance that maybe your fears are unfounded, or take into consideration, okay, you will need some special help with this because you don't have any experience at all with working with a tablet computer or whatever. We did have a student that she had not used a tablet before and found that intimidating. And so we found ways to, from that feedback in the evaluation, we found ways to sort of address that concern before she wound up in the class. And it's like, now you really need to be working with this tablet computer, whatever. I need to end my stream because I have my 4 o'clock Zoom. And thank you so much for joining me. I've enjoyed the comments in the chats as well, and I hope you learned a few things about shoes, even as you watched me just cut out shapes in felt, which was the primary functional part of Studio Stream. I think I release my May channel schedule tomorrow, and I'll definitely have figured out what is up with the stream calendar as well. So just take a look at, it'll come out on Instagram, and you'll see things scheduled. Streams will get scheduled on YouTube as well. So whichever platform you follow me on, one or both, I'll let you know how that's gonna work out. So thank you so much for joining me.